Today we're just going to have a quick look at Lycurgus and who he was and why he is an important figure, let's call him, in ancient Spartan society. So firstly, what we need to figure out is who he was. And what we know about Lycurgus comes from an ancient writer called Plutarch, and he was writing several hundred years after Spartan society existed. So the written accounts that we have of Lycurgus are questionable in terms of their reliability because they are based on other ancient sources that we no longer have access to and information that was passed down from hundreds of years after Spartan society actually ended. So that is how we know about Lycurgus. Now, what you'll find when you're researching Lycurgus, and you might have already noticed it in some of your different textbooks, is that there's lots of different spellings. I am going to use the one that is used in the New South Wales syllabus, which is the one you can see on your screen. Really, there's not really too many other references to Lycurgus outside of Plutarch. And Plutarch actually wrote a book called The Life of Lycurgus because he was really interested in all things to do with ancient Sparta, as were most Romans interested in Sparta. So our main source of information about Lycurgus and what he did is coming from Plutarch. That's an important piece of information to know. So what we know about Lycurgus and the name that he is often, or the title he's often given is Lycurgus the lawgiver, or he's known as the lawgiver of Spartan society. And the reason that he's given that title is because he was the one who made the laws that the Spartan society lived by that we study now, what we know of Spartan society during the period that we look at, which is from around about the 700 really BC mark till the end of society in 371 BC. The society was based on the laws that Lycurgus supposedly created for the Spartans to live by. Prior to around about the 750 BC mark, there is no evidence to suggest that Spartan society was much different from the rest of ancient Greece. So what we do know is that the Spartans at least believed, and therefore Plutarch, that the way in which they lived and the way their society functioned was based on the laws that were proclaimed by this figure that we call Lycurgus. And he created laws about lots of different things, from the way in which men and women were supposed to conduct themselves. One of his laws that we kind of see as one of a more unique aspect of Spartan society is the government structure of Sparta. So he was responsible for making up the oligarchic structure that was Spartan society with the two kings and the Gerousia and the ecclesia or the assembly. The thing that it has not been attributed to Lycurgus though, and there's no evidence to suggest that he made this, but this actually came later, was the ephors or the ephorate. It appears as though, from what we know, that was not part of the original Lycurgan laws. There's also, it's not really clear to what extent Lycurgus is responsible for the evidence that we have, or the written evidence for infanticide, so the way that they would expose infants from birth if they looked like they were unhealthy and that sort of thing. So it's that some of those things aren't 100% clear as to whether he made those up or whether they developed out of the values and beliefs that the other laws he created, that the impact that had on society. That's probably something that we'll never know for sure. So the next question that most people have, and that we will probably never have an answer to because of lack of evidence, is, was he a real person? There's no real consensus on this. Some historians believe that yes, he was a real person who existed at about the time that people thought he existed, 750 BC. Other historians think that it was a title that was given to various leaders of Spartan society during that particular period of time. And other people think that, which I guess goes with the title, that he was an amalgamation of different people and kings during that period. We don't really know. There is no reference to anything like Lycurgus or Spartan society being as it is in texts like the Iliad by Homer, in which there's obviously references to Sparta in about the 1100 BC. So it's very difficult to know exactly what the situation was in regards to Lycurgus. What we do know, though, and why he is important as a figure, if not an actual human being, is that it is the Lycurgan laws that formed the basis of Spartan society. So a lot of the things that they believed, their training, their educational system, the agoge, was based on laws from him. So he also was responsible for not permitting Spartans to undertake things like economic trade, that their men's primary function should be to be soldiers and serve the Spartan state, and women's main priority should be to have babies that would become soldiers to serve the Spartan state. So in the Lycurgan view of Spartan society, men and women had equally important roles, but they were all to the same end, which was to produce a strong military society. There is some suggestion that his laws, that prior to him passing these laws down, if it was in fact to him, is that Spartan society had the same sort of levels of literacy that other parts of Greece did, and that there was actually a decline in people's ability to read and write, because that was really discouraged as part of their military training because there was no need for it, and that those sorts of things would actually detract from their training as good soldiers for Sparta. So finally, and I think we've already talked a little bit about this, how important is Lycurgus? Very important. So if you are going to really make any comment or in any responses to particularly longer responses about Spartan society and its development, you really need to mention Lycurgus, because irrespective of whether he was a real person or not, he served a very important function in shaping the Spartan society that we know, but Lycurgus was the point of difference in Spartan society when looking at comparing it to other Greek city-states of the time. When you look at the period in which he was supposed to exist and what else was happening in the Peloponnese during that period, it is obvious that the Lycurgan reforms and laws were in response to the Messenian wars that were taking place, and that was the Messenians obviously become the helots, which were serfs of the state of Sparta, and so there's a very, very good possibility that the Lycurgan reforms were a very prompt response to the fact that they suddenly had this massive population that were basically enslaved that they needed to control. It would have made lots of sense for laws to be passed where people would only concentrate on being soldiers who could manage an enslaved population that, depending on which sources you read, was anything between 3 or 4 times or 20 times larger than the Spartan population. So it makes a lot of sense in the context of what was happening during that time that we know about from other sources, and the period that Lycurgus was supposed to have existed, that these laws came about. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about the importance of Lycurgus in relation to Spartan society.